With that being said, Lamada called me to help thank you, Habibi, situate the conversation. But with Dr. Hatem being here, there's no point of me speaking at all. He's our teacher. So we will dedicate most of the time, inshallah, for him to benefit from his knowledge, benefit from his experience, and give us a little bit more of an understanding of the movement today and the movement in the past. I think what we've been witnessing in the past couple of weeks, specifically after 6 months of genocide in Palestine, but besides the genocide, 6 months of resistance, 6 months of steadfastness, 6 months of resilience and selflessness in the people of Gaza. And I think with that level of resistance, with this level of steadfastness and resilience, I don't think the students would have accomplished what they accomplished. I think the students have nurtured their courage and bravery from the sacrifices of the people of Gaza. So it's essential to understand that we as Palestinians, we're not just victims of genocide. We're also actors in a political sense. We are also people that are fighting for justice, people that are not willing to die without pushing and fighting for gaining our liberation and gaining our national aspiration, specifically when it comes to liberation. This moment that we're in today, it's unprecedented without a doubt, in the sense of that we have not seen this level of encampments, we have not seen this level of courage and bravery from students that a lot of them are not even Muslims. But with that being said, I think it's essential for us to understand that there is a history behind how did we get to here. This level of accumulation, as we know in liberation movements, there's a level of accumulation of resistance, meaning that it's not one day a generation will come and will erase everything that happened before, right? This is a level of accumulation of hundreds of years of sacrifices, of resistance, and people in Palestine and abroad. And Dr. Hatem Bazian is one of the examples of the people who had the vision of creating this understanding that we need to focus on the level of students organizing, but also on a national grassroots level. And this was essential for him and his colleagues to start Students for Justice in Palestine, on what we know as SJP, and American Muslims for Palestine. Both of them kind of complement each other, where we have students from different backgrounds can come in universities and focus on the concept of justice in Palestine. And this was essential, historically speaking, because of the domination of what we know in the past, the PLO, specifically when it comes to GUPS, the General Union of Palestine Students, was politicized in a way that was not very helpful for the Palestinian cause. With that being said, I think I will leave a little bit more time to have good benefit, inshallah, from Dr. Hatem Bazian. I'll be asking some intro questions to kind of get us in the conversation and benefit from this conversation, but later on, inshallah, feel free to ask questions and get to Dr. Hatem directly. With that being said, thank you, Dr. for being with us. It's an honor to have you here. I think the most important question that we've been witnessing recently is that how did we get to this level when it comes to students mobilizing, getting from the level of just doing events in universities to where we see students that are not just brave. It's clear that they have a level of shrewdness and intellect that allows them to see in their demands, in the way they negotiate, in the way they organize. It's obvious that they're at a level where it kind of matches a little bit of the sacrifices of people of Gaza. So we would love for you to just walk us through how we get to today.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم. So whenever we're talking about political movements, especially when we talk about the youth, we talk about students, political movements are accumulative. Even though that we are witnessing now what I call a tipping point, the tipping point is possible because there's been a cumulative type of political work, organizing, grassroots building, education, and consciousness building. And I would say if we want to evaluate where the Palestine movement in the United States, you really have to get to the middle 1980s and to the period of the anti-apartheid movement and Central American Solidarity movement. In those two movements, Palestine was actually a participant and a central player. Where prior to those, Palestine were actually almost pushed out from the stage, was not allowed to have a presence. So prior to Central American Solidarity movement and the anti-apartheid movement, Palestinians were not allowed on a stage to speak in what used to be the spring mobilization for peace, jobs, and justice. The maximum they would allow, again, these are supposedly progressives, what we call today progressives, except on Palestine. There's still that category, right? There still need to go some mutation. But in general, they would allow somebody possibly to hold the Palestinian flag in the corner of the stage. Literally, that was the identification with Palestine at that stage. But because both the Central American Solidarity Movement had a link to El Salvador, to Nicaragua, to Latin America, where Palestinians were actually critically part of this, of the movement, especially in El Salvador, where the leader of the El Salvador resistance movement at the time, the FMLN, was actually a Palestinian, Shafiq Handal. That brought in a recognition, especially where Israel was actually supporting the death squads and training the death squads at a time in Latin America. So that part of the solidarity movement in the United States began to recognize the transnational nature of Israel work, especially with death squads in Latin America, and where the Palestinian movement is at. We moved to the anti-apartheid movement, and similarly, the anti-apartheid movement brought Palestine center stage, and this is as a direct result of Palestinian support of black South Africans during the struggle, and therefore also Israel was on the wrong side of history, because Israel was supporting South Africa racist apartheid government. They were funneling weapons to apartheid South Africa. They built the fence between Mozambique and South Africa by an Israeli company to build that fence to prevent the ANC from actually being able to struggle and come through the Mozambique border to resist the apartheid regime. On the other hand, the Palestinians were helping actually train the South Africans in Algeria, in Libya, in Lebanon, and so much so that when Nelson Mandela was sent to jail, it was actually the PLO, again, we could critique our internal politics, the PLO actually funded Mandela's family. So they provided the resources because Mandela was sent to jail in 1964 and stayed in jail until early 1991. So during that period, the Palestinians, actually the PLO in particular, provided the resources and also helped the international aspect of the ANC to get this type of work on a global level. So that brought the Palestinians in the United States in close relations with the political movement that is working on the apartheid front. And that continued all the way up to the last day when Nelson Mandela is released. When we speak about the anti-apartheid movement, the Zionists in the United States were supporting apartheid South Africa. So, for example, we talk about the ADL. Somebody, what is the ADL? The Anti-Defamation. I call them the Defamation League. I take the A out. Right? So the ADL actually spied on the activists, especially the anti-apartheid activists, and exchanged that information with apartheid South Africa. They also spied on the Irish activists who were escapees from the H Block prison and shared that information with the British intelligence in exchange of these two intelligence services to help the ADL and the pro-Israel security forces against the Palestinians. So the ADL had a long record of actually standing with apartheid South Africa and helping domestically in the United States in spying on all these different groups. So those two movements helped actually ground some of the Palestine work in the United States. And as the U.S. Engaged in Iraq, the Iraq War, that work that went into these two movements made it possible for Palestine work actually to come into center stage. So literally from 1991 onward, it was an accumulative process where Palestinians moving more and more and more into the center of political activism. And now I would say that it's in a leadership position on political activism in the country. Today, you cannot organize in the United States on a progressive end without actually having Palestine as a central aspect of your organizing. And literally what we're witnessing on the campus today is a cumulative of that period. So that's how we need to think of the longer trajectory in terms of organizing. And we could get into specifically the campus maybe at a later question.
Thank you. I think it's very important that you mentioned the relationship between the ANC and the PLO, specifically the struggle for liberation in South Africa and in Palestine. It gives us an important discussion. We would love to hear your point on this. And for people who don't know, Dr. Hatem Bazian is expert on the concept of coloniality, the concept of colonialism and imperialism. And I think maybe if you can give us a little bit of your an analysis in terms of the relationship between why was Israel involved in supporting apartheid in South Africa from an imperialistic perspective. And mostly I'm leaning towards the client state mindset and how the relationship between Israel and the US and why it's important for the US to continue to support Israel for a very long time now. And hopefully that leads us to more to the students' work.
Well, the relationship between South Africa and apartheid South Africa and Israel is actually goes back to 1948 when Israel established the first foreign visitor to Israel was the Prime Minister of South Africa. So literally the relationship was formative in that period. And when South Africa implemented its apartheid system, actually South Africa was being used as an inspiration for how to constitute a system of apartheid inside the West Bank, in particular in the Gaza Strip. Sharon's plan, which came to be known as the 5-star cluster plan in the West Bank, was modeled on South Africa black homelands. And if we think about what today we call the Oslo type of a structure in the West Bank, literally is inspired or at least have the same type of framing of the apartheid system in relations to South Africa. What is important in relations to think about colonialism, right? South Africa was the last settler colonial project to be demolished in Africa. So if you looked at the map of the world in 1914, right, 85% of the world's surface was a colonial territory and possession. You were either a subject of the British, the French, the Dutch, the Italians, the Portuguese, right, and the Germans. So literally, you were a product or a subject, not a citizen, a subject of one of those states. And Palestine was the last settler colonial project to be commissioned. So literally, as we get into the end of World War I and colonialism as an idea is running out of steam, and they're beginning to speak about, self-determination, the language was shifted, but still colonization was there. Palestine was the last settler colonial project to be commissioned. And when the British set up the Palestine as a colony, we need to understand this was pre-World War II, because you have many people running around here talking about this is a recompense for the Holocaust, that atonement for Europe. That's a later development. The British began to adopt Zionism in the early part of the 20th century. But also there's actually a book that actually writes on Columbus notes on his notebook during his journey. Columbus' project to come to the West to try to get to India was to actually try to, for another crusade, were to come and attack the Muslim world out of the Western, to go to the West in order to arrive to Palestine from the East, and literally to try to collect as much gold and silver and wealth in order to carry on a crusade after the crusades in the East, the 13th crusade failed. So literally that idea of the British incubating a colonial project in Palestine for their own purposes, one is to continue to think in crusading terms, but more importantly for the resources and trade routes. And that's still the case. The United States, Europe, all these states are in the region because the region, which is the Arab and Muslim world, is the most lucrative region in terms of natural resources, in particular oil and natural gas. The British, the French, the Germans, so on, they can't make a breakfast without natural gas. They have no resources whatsoever. And every day they need between 40 to 50 million cubic metric tons of natural gas. And that natural gas predominantly comes from the region that they have. So the British were thinking, I'm giving them credit that they think, right? So they were thinking in order to, one, have access to the resources, because oil gets to be discovered in 1908. And from that point, this region becomes the most important region for the Industrial Revolution and the domination of the economy. And the second is trade routes. And we see today the trade routes in Yemen, right? Between 14 to 16% of global trade passes through Bab el-Mandeb, right? And that's so critical because the distance at cost, as well as prolong the supply chain that is coming, in particular to Europe. Much of the world still works to uplift Europe and the United States. The whole global economy literally is upholding and trying to serve those two economies in general for supplies, natural resources, and so on. That dynamics did not change. It begins in the 1800s and continues to today. And in order to facilitate this, you have facilitation by using client states to continue the arrival of natural resources and capturing markets. And that's where we are in relations to the region.
Yeah, thank you. And for those who don't know the difference between colonialism, settler colonialism, colonialism is the idea, as Dr. Hatem mentioned, is when you're going to a new colony, exploit their resources to bring it back to the metropolitan, to the capital of that colonial powers. Settler colonialism is when you want to replace the native people who live in that land, right? America is a perfect example of settler colonialism, where the indigenous people were exterminated to bring in white people to live here. So that's the difference in what we were witnessing in South Africa. Now, I want to link this a little bit. I would love to get your input on it, because I really want to go back to why are the student movement today is so, specifically the anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-colonial movement that we're witnessing today, why it's so important for them to center Palestine in their rhetoric. Before we go there, and maybe by answering the question, you can lead us there as well. Why is America invested so much in Israel now? Like, for example, a lot of people are arguing now that Biden is willing to lose the presidency for the sake of Israel. And a lot of people make it it's a personal problem because he's a Zionist, he's willing to do anything. Yeah. But in addition to what you gave us, the historical context, can you shed some light into how that this is not just, unless, of course, give us your perspective, is this like a personal issue for Biden, or is this a politics for the empire as we see the United States today, that it's important for them, as you mentioned, as you alluded to, into continuing that support? And then if you can lead us to the centralization of the cause of Palestine and that anti-colonial movement, specifically, namely in SJPs.
Well, I think in the United States, and in particular for the political order in here, as it relates specifically to Palestine, AIPAC plays an important role, right? And its role is to make sure that U.S. policy, as it relates to Palestinian, passes through AIPAC and its priorities. I believe the United States still is an imperial power. And the United States has many options in running its imperial power. I mean, here in a mosque, right? The United States option with MBS is possibly greater than its option with Israel. Because in Israel, you have to go through the whole process of, not democracy, but at least there's a level of engagement, there's a pressure in here. On MBS, when they had to buy their, $80 billion planes, they wanted to give it to Airbus. With a phone call overnight, they changed the contract and gave it to Boeing, even though Boeing planes are dropping from the sky like flies. Right? So literally a state like Israel with $80 billion contract overnight switching against their own self-interest because of that relationship. And if you think about the region, the United States has considerable leverage in there. What AIPAC wants to maintain is that the only way for the U.S. to unfold its imperial superpower is through Israel. And I do think there is a conflict, or at least, again, taking U.S. national interests as it is, right? We could debate it, right? The U.S. national interest. The United States wants access to natural resources, particular oil and natural gas, not only for itself, but it wants to limit the access to China and continue to pressure. Russia has its own oil and natural gas. Want to pressure Europe to maintain Europe that the United States is leader of the G7. So that's a major national security. It goes back to the 1950s, the U.S. national security. So it wants that access. Second, it wants stability. Why? Because stability is much better for business. I don't know if you saw Starbucks sales this past quarter. Alhamdulillah, we've been able to limit our drink from Starbucks. They lost close to $43 billion in value of their stock, right, since the October period. So literally, it was 108 when the events occurred and when Starbucks began to identify more with supporting Israel, and now it's at 73. The reduction in sales the reduction in sales is -3%. Now you say, oh, that's it, -3%. -3% on a sale of $8 billion, it adds up. And that diminishes the ability of a company. One is to actually go out because you have a revolving credit line. You're not able to get the same type of credit line. Many companies leverage their value in the market to actually get extended loan in order to open more branches and so on. Your expansion, they had to shut down all of their branches in Egypt. So Starbucks right now is in a weakened position, right, as a result of U.S. standing policy with Israel. So the fact is that the United States loses stability of the market for its business. Again, we could argue whether we want to have it or not, but that's a major. Third, the United States does not want proliferation of nuclear weapons. It wants to only have nuclear weapons, and it's what you call country club. The fact that Israel became a nuclear power, Israel supported India's nuclear program and accelerated the India-Pakistan nuclear program. In 1978, Israel wanted to develop nuclear program for South Africa. So Israel, as one country, has been pushing to actually spread nuclear weapons rather than actually limit the club of the nuclear club. And as we know, Iran wants to have a nuclear weapons. MBS in his Strait, Cube, whatever projects, he wants nuclear weapons, and that's where the recognition between Israel and Saudi Arabia is contingent on whether Saudi Arabia will get nuclear abilities, right? So Libya was developing its nuclear program, and my cousin is developing a nuclear program. Again, why? Because everybody thinks if Israel has it, then we need to have a detente or a mutual assured destruction. So Israel says that it's serving U.S. national interests. Again, debating U.S. national interests, but this is what is understood. Fourth, Israel actually has been used as a bypass to send major advanced technology to China. Right? So all these congressmen that stands up and rant about China, well, if you're serious about China, well, why don't you go and talk to Israel? Because Israel has been the bypass door to send advanced technology to China. And added to this, which was at item 5, Israel have helped China in developing its advanced missile system. Right? So all of the key issues that the U.S., again, whether Ted Cruz, because he happens to constantly attack us and so on, if you're talking about U.S. national interests and you say that Israel is serving and is the key strategic ally in every aspect of U.S. professed strategic interests, Israel is a counter product to it. So that's where we have to assess where AIPAC is in terms of its role, and then some of the other client states that are literally undermining U.S. professed national interests as an imperial power in the conduct that we are seeing in the region.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. That's a great explanation in finding how Israel and the U.S. are playing the game which one has the last word in that sense, but they both are benefiting from each other for sure, as you mentioned. And I think AIPAC has grown, being allowed to play that role in an imperialist empire has grown so powerful that they themselves can actually shift a little bit in the main conversation. With that being said, how do you see the current wave of student organizing versus what we've seen in the past? I know we talked about accumulation of the resistance, accumulation of the movement itself. We talked about the relationship with South Africa, the relationship with apartheid, the relationship now between America as an empire, as this superpower that's trying to control the world and stay on top of the world. But Israel is trying to take advantage of that as well. Why is this movement today for the cause of Palestine has been this powerful in making an impact? Because there has been a lot of conversations, and I'm sure you've written about this in the past, since September 11 at least, in terms of how the Muslim community has been organizing and trying to be so American in their organizing by what is known as the raising the U.S. flag, by being involved in electoral power, politics. Why is this movement creating, maybe, if you agree on this, an alternative way of organizing to actually put pressure on the system rather than just trying to quote-unquote change the system from within by the electoral politics and whatnot?
Well, I also think the moment is a cumulative that we are in, right? You cannot actually think of today the campus without thinking of the Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street. Also, we are beneficiary of the George Floyd protest movement that opened the political discourse in the United States in ways that are different than before. And then also we need to point to the 2021 attack on Al-Aqsa during Ramadan. If you remember the April 2021, where Israel unleashed its attack on people praying right in Al-Aqsa Mosque and people witnessing while it's being live streamed the attack that was taking place and then bombing Gaza. So that resulted in an increased awareness at the time. Also the fact that, what was his name, the orange president? Oh, Trump. Right? The fact that Trump instituted the Muslim ban and resulted in people actually coming out in political organizing in ways that for a moment they didn't feel that it was the norm, right? People were going out to the airports, blocking streets, protesting, and beginning to take civil disobedience, which was unheard of. Like, when بدك تروح تنحبس? No, you can't do that, right? So Muslims and activists began to take civil disobedience at a time that changed the nature of political work. Now, specifically for campus, you already had about 200 SJPs in place, right? Students for Justice in Palestine across the country. And these are, many of them possibly sprung up post-2014, with many actually 2020, 2021 beginning to organize in that way. So that's very important to actually think of it cumulatively. Now I'm going to jump and I would actually express my gratitude and alhamdulillah wa shukran li ni'mat Shafiq. Right? I really want to thank her in a mocking way, but thank her. When you get called to the Congress to testify, like you made it, because now the camera is in front of you, you are a national figure, there's going to be an article about you in the New York Times. It's like these university presidents, they look just to be quoted, right? Not on page 14, but they want to be on in the front page. CNN is going to carry them. Na'mat Shafiq made it to Congress. She's testifying. She's, back and forth with these leadership. So from her thought, this was a moment of, coming on the national stage. If things went well the next day, she might be actually make herself into a secretary of something, right? The secretary of nothingness is always open. She really thought that she will be on this national stage, came back from Congress empowered, because what they told her is that you really held yourself up. You did not, defend the pro-Palestine. You threw Joseph Mas'ad under the bus, right? You did well, and we think that, we trust in your ability. So she came, dancing down from Washington, D.C., ready to show people who's the new sheriff in town. They told her to crack heads, to do to the students what needs to be done, because that's what a leader does. Again, a leader that takes the wrong phone call, and they're looking differently. So from her perspective, she thought that she was actually going to be celebrated. Calling the New York Police Department in, removing the encampment, arresting people, that she had it. And most likely, the next day, if you notice, people actually were praising her at the higher up in terms of Washington, D.C., but they did not expect the reaction. Overnight, literally within 48 hours, 80 campuses joined in putting encampments. So literally what she thought will be a moment of her ascending to a top position, resulted in actually a massive reaction and a massive response. 80 campuses, and they increased. When I traveled here on, I came Thursday night. When I left California, it was at 120 campuses. As I arrived, there was 10 new campuses that joined, and today is about 140 campuses. So literally acting in terms of the United States. Then you had Canada joined, France, Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, Italy, Greece, all these are now students are in Cameroon. Now look at the reaction. In France, they closed the Sorbonne, and also another, Paris 8, they closed the campus completely. For my perspective, this is like the overreaction that will actually result in further organizing, because the worst thing that you could do to the young and restless, the students, is to tell them you can't organize and you need to actually literally shut up and close your mouth and we know better. So literally the opposite is actually occurring. Then followed by the disaster, I know people, the disaster in UCLA, The disaster of UCLA, both the night, for 4 hours, literally Zionist thugs were attacking the encampment. 4 hours. The campus police is sitting, and I've been on campuses, I'm going to be on Friday in UCLA, A cat walks by, and the police will actually monitor, especially if a cat wearing a kufi, mashallah, that's it. They're going to call what you call the SWAT team to come down. So you tell me for 4 hours, attacks are coming using fireworks, using all kinds of projectile on the encampment, and the campus police nowhere to be found. At UCLA, I don't know if you've been to UCLA and to visit it, it's like, between Disneyland and UCLA, it's basically like a common what you call framework. Most of Hollywood movies use the campus. So the campus is highly securitized, highly policed, cameras all over the place, a large police force on campus. And to think for 4 hours, that the university did not have a response, then they called the LAPD. And it seems that the LAPD was coordinating with a security force that is actually from the Zionists, which is, quote, ex-Mossad agents that are operating in within the Los Angeles Police Department. And they took LA Police Department to Israel for training. So literally right now, all of this is public information. All is actually being out in the open, and now the faculty are actually having a vote of no confidence in the chancellor of the university, and the reaction, again, taking place on both national and international level, resulting in the intensification of the campaign, both because there is a cumulative knowledge, again, but also the moment of literally people that they think they're acting in ways to suppress, and that have resulted in intensification and a massive response. Lastly, I would say that the Muslim-Arab component is not the large component of the protest. In some areas there is, but one of the places I speak about is Humboldt State University. Now, Humboldt State University is out in the corner of California, all the way up in the north. There is no Arabs and Muslims there. Even if you want to see a dark complexion person, you have to put 2 sunglasses just to see somebody with a darker complexion of a melanin. Literally, it's one of the purest, not what you call activists, white activists. The area is known for having the best marijuana and hashish in California. That literally is out there in Humboldt County. Even the sheriff of the town was arrested for peddling in illegal marijuana. So that's the time the students have had taken over the building. They've been holding the building for the past 12 days. As organizers, and the police have not been able to dislodge them. And they're literally, if Palestine have made the mobilization in Cal State, Humboldt County, that tells you that the type of dynamics is completely different that we're witnessing. The last part, I saw the Bernard College had a vote by the students, which is also, if you listen to this guy, Jonathan Greenblatt from the Defamation League of Arab Muslims and Islamophobia, right? He says that's only few people that are really supporting Palestine. The Bernard College vote, 71% voted for divestment. All right, 71%. No, actually, not 91% at Bernard College. 91% voting for the divestment resolution on the campus. The second vote is actually in Stanford University, and Stanford University is also unique. Stanford University is the think tank of the Republican think tank of the right wing in the United States, right? The students, the undergraduate students voted for a divestment resolution, all of the student population on campus. It passed by 72%. The graduate students passed the resolution by 74%. If Stanford as an institution have that type of change in relations to voting for divestment, that tells you we're witnessing a complete tipping point and transformation that is irreversible. And that's why the level of repression that is directed at trying to reconstitute Israel's position is literally going crazy and irrational. It's not because they are successful or they're powerful and so on, they might be, but because they have lost the sense of what is occurring, and they have no solution or response to it. That's why they're going into maximum repression after I say that the change have already tipped in completely opposite ways, no longer even close in campuses across the country.
Very good. So you explained a little bit in terms of how we get there, in terms of why the students are rising up. And I think we gave a lot of analysis in terms of historical, in terms of the relationship after George Floyd, in terms of the wars in 2008, 9, 14, and the issue with Sheikh Jarrah and 2021. And I think the centralization of Palestine and the anti-racist, anti-colonial movement. And I think, as you mentioned, like the students have been, sisters, if we can just be a little bit quiet, please. The concept in terms of the effects of these encampments, the effects of these student movements, how do you see them making an impact on the decision-making process in the U.S. when it comes to the war in Gaza? As we see, Muslims across the country have been pushing the Democrats, pushing the administration with literally nothing in return. Do you feel that this movement today, has it done anything in terms of putting pressure? And if yes or no, and then can it do more in the near future?
Well, it already has an impact. Now, whether the impact is going to be immediately translated to immediate policy, that's where the question is. The fact that even the president and the State Department have been trying to change their language a little bit indicates that they're worried. The fact that looking at the polling data for upcoming elections, they're concerned and they see that there is an impact on Biden. The CNN poll from Friday, 81% of those between 18 and 35 are negative, disapprove of Biden's policy on relations to Palestine. 81%, that's age 18 to 35. Meaning that there is no way that Biden can actually secure the vote and the support of the young population. Now, I do believe that the movement is already making an impact. In a number of campuses, the universities already have consented to the demands of the students. Right? So we saw the UC Riverside. The university actually accepted their demands, and yesterday they dismantled their encampment. Rutgers University, 8 out of 10 of their demands, and again, people are debating, but still that actually 8 out of 10 demands are there. Brown University already accepted to put the divestment call to a vote, and also to release the information about their investment. So that's, again, is taking place. Evergreen College have already voted to actually divest from the Israeli economy. These are very important. Actually, also, we have 2 cities that already have voted for divestment, Hayward, city of Hayward, and Richmond. Each of them are managing, or at least have $500 million of an investment that they will take it out of Israeli economy. When we talk about South Africa anti-apartheid movement, it took us 14 years just to register the first what you call success and victory. So the fact that it's accelerating and also making it possible for people to increase their ceiling of demands that is taking place. So that's very positive that we're seeing and witnessing there. In some other campuses, we're actually calling on students to demand Palestine Studies program, to demand hiring faculty, Palestinian faculty, because you also have to increase and also bring Palestine in an academic way. That will be an important piece of establishing long-term, right, exposure, long-term engagement with Palestine. And there are a number of campuses already actually accepting those demands. So we are seeing some of these successes, victories, but to say that it's tomorrow Gaza or tomorrow the West Bank, it's not in that way. Again, South Africa, if we think about the protests around Soweto, 1975, literally the movement did not register real serious victory until 1988, 89, which was 2 years just before Nelson Mandela was released from jail. So I would think we're moving in a very clear path, and we need to celebrate our small victories while preparing for more dynamic engagement in order for us to continue to push, which will impact Palestine on the ground.
Thank you, Doctor. This is very, very useful. Okay, we have 15 minutes until Salah. You have 2 options. We have a lot of questions. We can either pick and choose some of them, and you can take your time, or we can do like rapid fire. You can answer them quickly. Which one you prefer?
Just go quickly.
Quickly. Love it. First question, I think I'm going through popularity, and we'll be democratic here. So someone is asking about that they have noticed a large amount of LGBTQ presence at protests and different ideologies in the groups. What are we allowed to stand alongside them for the cause of the protest in terms of how do we work with them in these protests?
This is the moment that you have a big tent for people who are standing for justice. Considering that you have 57 Muslim majority states that are not standing with Palestine. So I don't know where people are. On the one hand, you have Muslim states that are closing the borders and not sending a bottle of water to Palestinians, and now you're going to engage in the tangential at this particular time. So for me, that's just like going on a tangent while people are literally in a genocide.
Appreciate it. That put things in perspective. I think we have to have priorities in fiqh and in Islam in general. What are your thoughts on entering empty ballot submission in swing states such as Michigan?
It's very important. That was one of the strategy we adopted, and we worked with Michigan, Georgia, and other places where you are able to do so in order to demonstrate your strength. And by the time we get into the Democratic Convention, which is in August, we'll see where we could have an impact.
Okay. Since we're doing rapid fire, so I'll ask this one too. Do you think anything will change if Palestine receives full United Nations membership?
Well, think of it this way. If it was not important, the United States would not veto it. When you have international law and international relations is built around nation-state rights. So we're in a nation-state international system. So recognition of the sovereignty and state status of Palestine gives you the ability to act as a sovereign, and therefore many different parts of the United Nations functions around this nation-state rights. This does not mean that all of a sudden, mashallah, we're going to be happy, we're going to have knafi for everybody because we did this. It's just a cumulative part where we are trying different avenues, and Israel, its allies, the United States, and so on, are trying to prevent every opening that the Palestinians will have an impact. So yes, wherever an arena that we could push Palestine forward, right? We should take that arena while not believing that that arena will be the end cause. It's one of the tools of the strategy rather than the totality of the strategy.
One student, I think, is saying that their school, which is FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology, is currently the last encampment is standing in New York City. What advice do you give the SGP there, or in terms of what should they focus on in the last few days of encampments?
Well, if the encampments have been removed, then we need to actually go back, study, not for exam, but study our strategies and see where are the system and where our institutions have weakness. And then also there is a discussion of actually taking the encampments to the streets in the city and begin to actually possibly replicate some of the strategies from the Occupy Wall Street in that way. So we have to respond in ways that we stretch our movement and also become movable, in the sense that the encampment is a strategy, is not, it's a tactic, it's not the overall strategy. So we have to adjust accordingly, right? Because some people begin to believe that if I don't have the encampment, that's it, Palestine, a Palestine cause has came to a halt. No, you need to be creative and find ways to actually engage. One thing that we're asking people these days, actually, if you are able to actually invest in some of the companies that have investment in Israel, as a shareholder, you could actually participate in the voting for shareholders. So to bring divestment resolution, to bring actually claims, legal claims against companies that they're not being actually fiduciary responsible with your investment. You could buy one share and still have a say in the process of a shareholder and be disruptive, right? This is a strategy that during the civil rights movement, during also the period with Jesse Jackson, try to have an impact, you bring the debate into shareholder meetings. And that's where you actually become disruptive in that way. So we need to be strategic in doing these things as a way, as a strategy. So again, the encampment, maybe in some places it's no longer feasible. Take it to the outside. Also pursue this investment shareholder type of political pressure.
Thank you. There was a question about how do you handle Zionist rhetoric about encampments being pushed by outside agitators? Kind of how to respond to that.
I don't give them any recognition. It's just like that's the same complaint that during the Vietnam War. Now notice, big donors are not seen as big agitators because they pick up the phone and tell the president to do this and this why, right? It's only talked about as a way to try to defame the movement in that way, and then we should insist that there is no wall between the campus between the students, the campus, and the community. So these are community members that in solidarity and supporting the students. So we should not fall for it.
Yeah, falling distractions all the way. There's a couple of questions about elections in 2024 as a presidency. Any thoughts in terms of?
We're still working on that. We have a Muslim strategy meetings taking place on a national level, so we'll still are work in progress in that.
Okay. Quick question. Are protests haram?
What is that?
Are protests haram?
Huh. That's a new one.
Absolutely not. The fact that you're here, you should know the answer to that. Okay.
Well, let me answer the following. The fact that we have muftis in the Muslim world are saying it's haram to protest, but it's halal to have Nicki Minaj coming to the to places in the Muslim world should tell you where you could get your deen from. Right? So for me, I have no tolerance for someone that brings some of the most outlandish things in the Muslim world and yet have a mufti that issues fatwa that you need to scratch your head in that way. I don't know if you saw they brought I read the news. They brought what's his name, John Travolta, to Saudi Arabia. It's like even people in Los Angeles don't want to go and see John Travolta. Why you bring him in as a sign of what you call being part of the global society?
Allahu Akbar.
Okay, just wait a second. Okay.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Okay, there's a good question here. As of now, Israel and America are allies. Do you believe that eventually maybe there's a chance that we'll clash against each other at one point?
States don't have friends or permanent allies. They have interests, and those interests will shift. So there's no such thing as an everlasting alliance or friendship. And it's increasingly will change.
Good. I think this is a good relevant question. What are your thoughts and advice for, or maybe this is asking directly, Muslim community, specifically people who are getting on the political or professional ladder, who avoid the Palestine genocide and fear of risking their status or their careers? What maybe can be your advice there for them to navigate this?
I think it's a case-by-case basis. I am not a person that asks, well, you need to jump and sacrifice yourself because if not, you're a sellout. I don't follow that. I think each case has to be studied specifically. I do want our community professionals to reach a level of success, but they have to constantly give back, and how they give back could be different ways. I do think in some places, let's say those who are in government positions, they do have the responsibility now to actually be in a position where they step out because of the genocide and the ability for them to project a louder voice. But different circumstances for individual, right, are different. For example, our sister Jinan Shihade, what is her last name? No, Jinan Shihud from Chicago, right? She was given, they rescinded her employment contract, and again, it's an employment contract possibly in 220,000 as a law student graduate from a top school. So, she spoke for Palestine, and they rescinded her contract. So for us, again, I chair the MLFA, Muslim Legal Fund of America. So we offered her a job and brought her in our civil division. So each person we have to actually calibrate and understand, and that's where some of our community have to be provide those communication, those understanding for our professionals in order to see where they are located.
Okay, very good. I think we'll wrap up soon. I just want to give you an opportunity maybe for a few minutes if you have any last thoughts or messages you would like to give to the attendees or the youth, anybody's watching.
Well, I do think that our community have broken the barrier of fear, which is very, very, very important. Fear is a commodity that is used to immobilize people. So that fear barrier has broken. And as a community, we have to come out and support, on the one hand, the students, but also make space within our community for Palestine to organize, to advocate, to speak about. And then as we move closer to the election, don't accept political figures allowing them to actually come and talk to their community without actually being very clear where they stand in Palestine, especially in Muslim space. I think we're done with what I consider to be the falafel hummus politics, and you add a shawarma in there and take a picture. Those days are over. We want to have substantive position, very clear, that these individuals have to, and that's where the leadership of centers and Muslim organizations have to be clear in that, and that's our role to advocate. And then lastly, I would actually ask people to get to be creative, innovate in political organizing, especially among the young. I think this is your opportunity to actually put some of your skill and talent to innovate in ways that we possibly, the older generation, have not at least understood. I know there's a group that did an AI app, not an AI, where it actually takes the leading tweets of the day and they're allowing you to immediately actually form a response, and you send it out through the use of AI. So it actually makes response to Islamophobic content, anti-Palestinian content, using AI and in a helpful way. So that's, again, a quick innovation that people have done that made it possible for this response to occur. So I encourage people to think in those ways as a way to help Palestine. You don't, I want to make sure that the only place for you to contribute to Palestine is not only in the street or in the tent. There are many different ways that you could actually support and help for Palestine. I know that they've been doing the phone banking in here. You don't need to leave your home to do phone banking, right? And we need to make sure that we do phone banking, to engage in outreach. You could do outreach from the home or your car. Again, some of you commute for 2 hours, right? So you could actually use that opportunity to do outreach and so on. You could help fundraise. Fundraising is definitely
الله
something
أكبر
we need.
الله
So different
أكبر
ways to
أشهد أن
engage
لا
and
إله
Thank you
إلا
very much,
الله
Doctor. It's an
أشهد
honor to have
أن
you.
محمد
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد
رسول
أن لا إله إلا أنت
الله
أستغفرك وأتوب إليك
حي
والعصر
على
إن الإنسان لفي خسر
الصلاة
الذين آمنوا
حي
وعملوا الصالحات
على
وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
الفلاح
جزاكم الله خير.
قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
استقيموا يرحمكم الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين